It is with great haste that I write this, having just consumed a great quantity of fertilizer. My limbs are seizing and pain racks my every movement, but I can think with a clarity I've not felt in days. It is imperative that I leave this record, and I will attempt to master my nerves, that this might be legible. I had been in Cape Colony for a week, called there to assist Sir Hely Hutchinson in dealing with the rebels that had plunged the colony into civil war for 3 years. I was to manage one of the camps for refugees. I despised Africa immediately, a hot, dry, and filthy country full of disease. The only respite I had in this time was my manservant Walter. His constant presence at my side saved more than a few subordinates from reprimand. Walter seemed to take the continent far better than I. My work weighed heavily on me, and Walter's encouragement kept me at my desk even as further reports of deaths came in weekly. No matter what I requisitioned, they continued to expire in droves, and if I could not curtail it soon, I would be removed from my post in disgrace. It was this that brought me to what I believe was my point of exposure. Walter led me from my office in the government building to the camp that I was responsible for. The area was safe, and I felt more than comfortable leaving my revolver behind in my office. It was a sweltering day, and were it not for proper breeding as an Englishman, I should have removed my coat. I needed to ascertain the reason for the continued decline in population, and also estimate how much more the local graveyard could hold. The camp was teeming with the emaciated. It was most frustrating. I requisitioned all the food I dared, and now, seeing my changes for the first time, I could see that my efforts had been wasted. The crates of food remained piled in the center of the camp, reeking of spoilage. The people milled about aimlessly in the sun, shamelessly undressed. They had no drive to eat. They were killing themselves through sloth. Many of them lacked even the desire to move out of the sun, some of them being visibly blistered. Talking to them proved useless. Walter spoke to them in my stead. Those who could speak simply shrugged and said they hadn't noticed the food or the hunger or the deaths. When pressed, when Walter begged them to explain themselves, they ignored him. Frustrated, I called him off, and I asked him to take me to the next leg of our trip. The graveyard was one in only the loosest of definitions. It was comprised of large, unmarked mass graves, more an abattoir than cemetery. It certainly wasn't fit for a proper servant of the crown. Even for the people in the camp, it didn't seem like enough. One of the largest graves wasn't even filled properly. I could see a hand protruding out from the mound of earth. It attracted my gaze to the flower poking out from the side of the earth. Was a vibrant purple flower. I knelt down and examined the bloom. I grasped it by the stem to pick it and cut my finger on the thorns hidden beneath the petals. I drew back my hand, drawing the cut down the full length of my finger. A small rivulet of blood dripped onto the ground. Walter reacted, cutting a strip from his shirt with his knife and quickly tying it over the wound. I asked that he take me home. Without Walter, I suspect I would never have noticed the changes that consumed me. The peculiarities began 2 days later. I began shedding my clothes. My coat fell into disuse and was discarded entirely after 4 days. I recall only that I was warm. I didn't think it odd to be about in a state of undress. It simply seemed the most obvious way of cooling down. Soon after, my waistcoat, too, was gone. A week after the visit, I was shirtless. I had felt too confined in my office. The walls were getting to me, and I felt a tremendous desire to venture outside. I must have spent several hours milling about the courtyard of the government. It was nearly sunset before Walter found me. He had been searching the building for hours before looking outside on a whim. I laughed. "I'm sorry. I'll keep you abreast of my wanderings next time. It was a flight of fancy." "Are you all right, sir? You never go outside except on business." "Walter, I'm fine. I was simply taken with the desire to walk." "Sir, I think you should see the doctor." "Walter, I'm perfectly..." Walter cut me off by grasping my right arm. He ignited an explosion of pain where he touched me. Walter raised my arm. It was deep red from sunburn. I looked down. My entire body had been burnt to blistering. I hadn't felt a thing. In fact, I still wanted to be outside, but I was shaken and I allowed Walter to lead me to the doctor. I was given an ointment to ease the burns. I was restricted to my bed for the next 2 days, applying the ointment myself. I tried to piece out what might be wrong with me. I felt fine, aside from a lingering desire to be outside. It was a deep longing and consumed my thoughts. I reviewed my work from the previous week and discovered numerous errors. I could only attribute it to the distraction my longing presented. I even forgotten to feed myself. Had Walter not made it a point to regularly bring me food, I think I might have risked starvation. It wasn't until then that I realized that, for days now, I'd been exposing myself at work and now in public. It didn't bother me. I didn't want the shirt or the vest or the jacket. I was troubled that it didn't bother me. After 2 days of bed rest, I forced myself to return to work. Only one thing remained: another visit to the doctor to check up on my burns. I forced myself to don my full suit. Even as sweat beaded on my brow with each layer, I arrived at my appointment as scheduled, and the doctor was quite jovial. I disrobed my shirt for him. He rolled up my sleeves. My skin was peeling off in chunks. The blisters had gone. He was quite pleased with my progress. He passed behind me to finish the examination form. I was about to put my shirt back on when he stopped me. "Hold a moment. It looks like a sliver here on your back," he said, gripping my shoulder lightly. He gave a closer inspection of my back. "The little things are all over. You must have almost 2 dozen. No, 3. Not sure what they are, but you should have your bedding checked. They're quite large. One moment. I'll remove them." The physician moved over to his table and picked up his surgical knife. He walked back toward me. Rage rushed over me. I acted without thinking. He held one hand out from my shoulder to hold me steady. My body twisted off the chair and rose to stand while knocking his hand aside. My fist struck his face, sending him sprawling onto the ground. My hands closed around the chair. My body loomed over the physician. One swing of the chair knocked aside the arm he was using to defend himself. My body fell to its knees over the physician and brought the chair down again onto his skull, dashing his brains out onto the floor. The chair continued to come down until it shattered into pieces against the floor. The physician's head had been ruined. He was unrecognizable. His body's tremors had been done for minutes by the time I stopped. I stood up and backed away from the body and into a nurse who had been attracted by the noise. She had been too shocked to stop me. She screamed as I backed into her, and I whirled around. The lie slipped out easily. I pointed to the surgical knife still in the physician's hand. "He attacked me. I had to defend myself." I quickly fled the examination room as the shocked nurse continued to stare at the corpse. I tracked down Walter, finding him in my office. I explained what happened. "You killed him, sir?" I didn't think about it. It just happened. I was moving. It started when he went to cut out these slivers, I said, turning so Walter could see my back. "I want you to remove them, but restrain me." Walter nodded and fetched a chair. When I was securely tied to it, Walter went about examining my back. He counted 32 little green slivers in all. Walter cautioned me and drew his knife. I winced as he made a small incision in my back and fished underneath the sliver with his knife. Pain struck my entire body as steel touched the thing. Rage flashed over me, and my body thrashed in its bonds, but was held securely. "Sir, it's much longer than it appears," Walter said, pulling on the sliver and sending more pain coursing through me. "It feels like a vine or root. I think all of them may be connected. Sir, I don't think we can remove them. How did this happen?" I don't know, Walter, I said. Maybe that flower I cut myself on in the camp. Walter gripped my right hand in his left hand and carefully cut his bandage away. The cut had healed, but a thick green vein was clearly visible beneath the skin. Walter cut me free. Get dressed, sir, Walter instructed. What for? We're going back to the camp. If this can make you murder a man, we must eradicate the plant. Yes, of course, I said. Will you be all right on your own, sir, for a moment? I need to gather a few things. We'll need to leave before the soldiers come for you. I can handle myself, Walter. Walter left to gather his things as I went to my own quarters. I changed into a new suit. I was so distracted I barely noticed when I slipped my revolver into my pocket. I wanted to take it. I felt I might need it. I finished locking my things up when Walter arrived at my door. I shot him. Walter stumbled forward and his hand found his knife. The revolver was empty before I stopped firing. I knelt next to him. I couldn't make it to the graveyard. I no longer wanted to. I searched through Walter's pack, discovering oil and matches. I took his knife, cut the strap, and took his sack. I couldn't dispose of the graveyard, but I could dispose of myself. The flower had grown on and bloomed on one of the corpses. If I were to be arrested for my crimes, I would be sent back to Britain. I would be executed. I took my small chest, emptying it of my meager belongings, and stole out of the government building and ran to the gardener's shed. I took the inventory records down from their hook. I had to leave this record. You must understand. There, I set upon the work of depositing the oil about the shed. I stopped as my eyes fell upon the bags of fertilizer. They looked so good. I tossed the oil aside and sliced a bag open and began shoveling handfuls into my mouth. It tasted like fire as I swallowed it. The pain brought me back. There was no more time. I began writing. With this concluded, I need only to start fire. I can hear the search parties roaming the ground. I will make sure this letter survives my immolation. My body in the camp must be destroyed. I leave it to you. Charles Wallace.